Sorry, I'm talking to my puppy and getting my charger. All right. Good afternoon, LEC community. Thank you for joining us for our Friday's Community Platica. There we go. Our Platica this week was all around school reopenings because our article was titled "Teachers and Students Are Not Yours to Sacrifice." It was a piece written by a teacher, Molly Tansey, for the Medium. I have it up over here on my iPad. So, my printer's been acting crazy. Now it's jammed, and I don't have the patience for troubleshooting. But anyway, she is a 7th grade ELA teacher, and she has thoughts about school reopenings and the consideration of schools reopening. Of course, her title is "Teachers and Students Are Not Yours to Sacrifice," and so that gives you a glimpse of what her thoughts are right off the bat. She is not a fan of going back into buildings. We've learned a lot. I personally have learned a lot more this week about what school reopenings could mean. And part of that being that a lot of people haven't made decisions. A lot of districts around us in Kansas City haven't made official decisions. The only major decision that has been made has been by Governor Laura Kelly in Kansas, saying that the school start date will be delayed until after Labor Day, meaning that districts in the state will have about 2 more weeks than previous to make their decisions on what their school reopenings will look like. So the options right now are going completely into buildings with CDC guidelines and recommendations followed. That means masks, hand washing, hand sanitizer, social distancing in the classrooms and in the schools. The other option is a combination of both. So some time online, some time in classrooms. I know that some districts have gone as far as talking about having staggered schedules, and so not every student would be in the building every day. And so there's different variations of that. Half online and half, it really wouldn't be half, right? There's different variations to it. I know that at my older brother's school district for his kids, they have said that the parents will have an option, whether they want to go in class or have their students go in class or online. And then, of course, the last option is going completely online for now. There's so many variations of like the in-school online mix, but our author this week is not with going into the classroom. And I'm going to say that I agree with her. As a teacher, I know how difficult it would be to social distance. It goes against the best practices for teaching anyway. Most of what we know in the research for cognitive learning comes from learning with each other and teaching each other, students, I mean. So that means group projects, that means group work, that means partner work, that means students getting the opportunity to lead the teaching conversation, to form opinions together, to talk to each other, to debate with each other. And a lot of those elements of instruction seems like they would have to be stifled in order to follow social distancing guidelines. So our author, Miss Tansey, is her opinion is that, or what she is putting across is that we've heard from elected officials, pediatricians, journalists, and so on. One thing they all have in common, they aren't teachers, and their knowledge of how schools actually operate is practically non-existent. Feel free to chime in with us if you know something that I don't know, and if you as a teacher have an opinion, or as an educator, as a parent have an opinion. So she I think publicly, officials, pediatricians, journalists are the ones who are at the forefront of making this decision. But the LEC put out a series of surveys this week on Twitter, on Instagram, and on Facebook to see what our community's experiences have been with their districts, asking their input. What we learned on Monday and Tuesday, first of all, we posed the question on our LEC Facebook, how do you feel about schools reopening? And pretty much the sentiment in all of the comments was that it's too risky. Teachers in our community are not comfortable with the idea. They have really great ideas for how to innovate schools and education in order to still make sure learning is happening without being in the classroom. Yesterday in our surveys on Instagram and Twitter, we found out that I guess you would call them a majority of teachers had been asked for their input on schools reopening. On Twitter, our survey question was, classroom teachers, has your input been sought in your district's reopening plan? 67% of teachers said yes, and 33% said no. So that percentage could be better for the yes, for sure. But amongst the yeses and no's, the yeses are the majority. So on Instagram, we got some similar responses, which is that districts are asking teachers their input on schools reopening, and so that's a little bit reassuring. Edgar and I talked about taking it a step further and then asking, how is your input being implemented or being considered in the actual decision making, right? Because it's one thing for, like, as leaders of the LEC, we get feedback from our community all the time. And it's one thing to listen to that feedback, and then it's another thing to implement the change, right? Connie, hey girl, thank you for joining us. I'm going to bring up some comments. Connie says, it's still very risky to return to school. We should be protesting to fight for the safety of our staff and students. The worst feeling in the world is losing a life. She goes on to say, teachers are currently doing wills or updating their current will. I never thought about starting my will this soon. You know what? To summarize this whole thing that's turned into a debate, that shouldn't even be a debate. Teachers, students, parents should not feel like they have to choose between life or death. And I think Connie's right, which is that teachers feel like it would be a risk, and they feel so much so that it would be a risk that they are working on their wills. And that just breaks my heart to think that that's a decision that we're having to make. I've seen a lot on social media this week about how teachers get the brunt of a lot of this all the time. I thought yesterday in our Ask an Educator, where Edgar and I just kind of got your input, I thought about how as a teacher, it was really frustrating when mandates and policies would get brought down all the way to trickle down to the classroom, and then it just not be what's best for kids. We see it all the time. I know for me personally, an example I can think of are scope and sequences and curriculum timelines. Yes, I do think that there should be timelines on the things that we teach, but because things are so revolved around state testing, we as teachers get rushed to teach a lot of material. And so it often leaves little room for remediation or days for us to say, you know what, I can tell my class didn't get it. And trust me, those days happen. You plan a lesson plan as best as you can, and you're like, this is gonna I'm gonna kill it today. And then lessons flop. but you get so much pressure as a teacher, like keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. Even if your kids don't get it, keep going. And then pool, remediation groups, small groups, based on that lesson that wasn't understood. What I found as a teacher is that I'm already pulling small groups. Like, for example, in sixth grade, I'm already pulling small groups for my kiddos who are on a third grade math level, on a fourth grade math level, who are learning English and need some more manipulatives and some more supports. And now pulling small groups for a lesson that I really just didn't get the proficiency that I wanted to see, kind of just throws a hammer into my lesson plans and into actually these mandates that get brought down from administration, and I'm sure from above them, right? The scope and sequences. So that's one example of how all these policies and mandates get thrown on teachers, and they make it impossible for us to do our job well. That's obviously a really, I guess, petty, for lack of a better word, a petty example compared to what we have now. Our author of our article this week, Molly Tanzi, she is, as a teacher, upset that she doesn't feel that her input and her voice has been heard in deciding whether or not to go back to school. She even goes as far as to say that teachers and students are not yours to sacrifice. And like Connie said, that's how a lot of teachers are feeling, which is that we're not being considered in the decisions that are being made, so much so that we'd be willing to lose human life. Molly Tanzi goes on to say, far too often, teachers' voices are conspicuously absent from important decisions on education. Yeah, that's kind of what I was talking about with scope and sequences and the choice of curriculums and who's going to provide our curriculums this year. Those are just some examples. So there's a whole section of her article where she goes on to say, and those of you that want to argue that younger children are not as affected by COVID-19, just stop, right? Because she says, A, children are not the only people in school. B, some children are also in high-risk categories. And C, students in public schools can be as old as 26. The first thing, should already like negate the argument that, COVID-19 doesn't affect kids as much as it does adults. Well, first of all, children aren't the only people in schools. We have seen how there is the fallout of the secondary symptoms that kids who do get COVID-19 have that impacts their lungs. I don't know the name of it off the top of my head, but I know that has been the case. Connie has shared a link with us. Thank you so much, Connie. I can't click on it, but our commenters on Facebook, feel free to take a look. Hey, Elizabeth, thanks for joining us. Also, it's important to note who is being lost here disproportionately. It ain't those at the top. That is such a good point, Elizabeth, because think about who's going into schools. Whose contract is going to say that regardless, in order to keep your job, you have to be in school, or whatever those contracts are going to look like. It's going to be teachers and it's going to be kids. It's not going to be the federal lawmakers. It's not going to be the state lawmakers. I've even seen people saying it doesn't make sense when the meetings for schools reopening are held on Zoom because it's too risky to hold them in person, and we're talking about whether or not classrooms should be in person. It's exactly what you're saying, Elizabeth, which is that lawmakers and policy makers know the risk of having their meetings in person right now in July, and yet are considering sending kids to school in August. Hey, Ms. Herrera, thank you so much for joining us. There are too many health factors to keep us safe in our schools at this time. I absolutely agree. On top of what the author said in our article this week, that kids also are in high-risk categories. I've had students in the past who had asthma on a really serious level. I had kids that had prescribed steroids for their lungs in order to like just go to recess and participate in PE. And we know that those factors make it riskier for them to contract COVID-19. So that's also a consideration. But like Ms. Herrera said, so many other health factors, teachers. So I had a conversation with my husband the other night. I'm 6 months pregnant. I'm leaving the classroom this year for now, but if I were going to classrooms, I'm immunocompromised. That's such a hard word for me to say. But as a pregnant person, I'm immunocompromised. That's also the case for people who have autoimmune diseases, for people who perhaps are on cancer treatments, for people who have high blood pressure, who have diabetes, who have asthma, who have lung disease, all of these factors that also make it difficult for adults to be in schools. Or, we have people in schools who are at what's considered the risk age, or what was at first thought to be the only demographic that was severely affected, which is those people who are over 55 and 60. They work at our schools, right? So our author this week says, we also know that the virus spreads most easily, in crowded and poorly ventilated spaces. And she says, like schools. So on top of all those health factors and health issues that people walk into schools with, schools are also not the cleanest and most ventilated of places, right? Especially schools that are under-resourced and that are, that's the word I want to use, under-resourced, because I know that in my classroom a lot of time, actually, there was a year, was it my first year teaching or my second year teaching, when I taught summer school and our air conditioning didn't work. And it just took a really long time. I think it was 2 or 3 weeks before they got it fixed. It was, there was a part that was missed. I don't know. All of these things that meant more people and different people had to come in. But that's just an example of how if a medical emergency happened where if something different in the actual physical environment could be changed, but we're not getting those resources fast enough, that's risking people's lives. Martin, thank you so much for joining us. I see your comment. We realistically need to go online or hybrid for this coming semester. I completely agree with you. We have seen, like our author said, data out of Florida that has shown 11,000 positive cases amongst children. And this article is from July 12th. It is July 17th. I know this week has been a huge news week for Florida and the kids' cases in Florida. I'm actually going to pull it up. COVID cases. So these articles that are coming up are kind of old too, but here we go. Florida coronavirus. This is from the Washington Post. 31% of children have tested positive in Florida. 31% of children. So despite what the early news about COVID was, which was that kids aren't as negatively affected, 31% testing positive means that they are at risk for death. COVID-19 is killing people. And in some cases, we have seen where it's killing people that otherwise, or we would think perhaps would make it out of it. The author goes on to then bring up money. And you know what? I appreciate the space that Edgar and that the LEC has provided for me and for us, all of us as a community, to learn more. Because as a teacher, I think I was naive to how does money play a part in all of this. In my teacher preparation program, I think the IUE did a really good job of, I've learned about like property taxes and how all of that means for less proportionate schools, under-resourced schools, et cetera, especially in low-income areas. But then throw on top of that COVID. And yesterday, I appreciated all the comments of like how the economy is impacting why federal officials want us to go back to school so bad. My husband and I had this conversation a few days ago. I was like, babe, I know that I'm an educator. These are my dogs. It's actually one of my dogs. Cookie, our dachshund. She don't know how to act. So I'm an educator, and I really want to know more about why our federal officials want us to go back so bad. And he was like, that's true. What's in it for them? And so I'm learning a lot about that. Our author says, to those arguing that we invest money to make schools safe during a global pandemic, where have you been when we've been defunded for years? Missouri, Governor Parsons just defunded education in Missouri $130 million, like maybe a month ago. Thank you so much for those of us who are engaging with this. Elizabeth, thank you so much, sister. A few of my students' parents' families have passed away from COVID-19. How can we ask them to go back after that? Exactly. Exactly. And I know my mom, I also think about it in like a parent sense with my mom and the way she raised us. She is very serious about people taking COVID-19 seriously. She literally, if she could put me in a bubble, especially with me being pregnant, she'll tell my brothers and sisters, like, hey, if you've been out and about, like, don't come over to the house because Susana's here, and she's very serious about it. And so I wonder if we were school age at the time of COVID, if she would know that she'd have the option to keep us home. That's another thing. We have families that are underrepresented. Like my mom. My mom was underrepresented all of my school days. And a lot of the information that came from the school came through me as a student. And so her as a non-English speaking parent, as a disabled parent, she was left out of a lot of that important information. So Elizabeth, that's real. People who have family members that are being affected by this as well. Lori, hey girl, thanks for joining us. If the events that draw in hundreds of people are counseling where there is movement, we are still wanting students, staff, and faculty together. That's a good point. I was just in a conference this morning that went virtual because because of COVID. We had probably, what was it, Elizabeth, like 500 attendees or less than 500 attendees, but up in the hundreds. And I think about the school I taught at, that is between 400 and 500 kids, yearly. So yeah, like what are people thinking? What is anyone thinking? And I think it just comes down to the money. I really would love if you're learning with me and you're finding articles or more information about how economically it would hurt the government or policymakers to close schools. I want to see that research. So anyway, so the author then says, like, okay, let's just say we can come up with the money. Like, yeah, we've been defunded and all, like all that stuff. But let's say we came up with the money to reduce class sizes, to deliver concurrent in-person and virtual instruction, to provide PPE, to make sure every school has a nurse, regular testing of students and staff, increase the number of buses, effectively clean and sanitize schools, and so on. The schools we would be walking into would not be able to provide what children need or deserve. Schools are crucial to the social emotional development of children. This was the argument of the American Academy of Pediatrics. What was it, last week? They said, yes, kids, maybe 2 weeks ago. Yes, kids need to go back to school because schools are crucial to the social emotional development of children. Then the author's like, but hold up, because going back to school will also negatively impact, like, it's not going to be the school they're used to. It says, what they fail to acknowledge, what the author says, what they fail to acknowledge is that tossing kids back into schools that are not safe, where they're expected to keep a distance from their friends, and where their teachers are radiating anxiety is not an environment that will help them grow socially or emotionally. It's kind of like what you mentioned, Elizabeth, with that our schools would revolve around fear. Kids would be scared. And so even though it's, schools are crucial to social emotional development, school's not going to look like what our kids need social emotionally. So it talks about how kids will be frustrated, confused, and scared. And then, so in Arizona, there was also that news article about Arizona and those teachers who taught summer school, and they did everything right, the author says, and then a teacher still died. There was 3 teachers who were teaching in the classroom, and a teacher still passed away. How do you feel their absences? I know there were days as a teacher where it was like, do you really have to be off? Because it's going to be really hard to get a substitute on that day because X, Y, Z. We have visitors in the building that day, and so we really don't want that many substitutes in. We can't get very many. Like the substitute issue is a school issue, a systematic issue, right? And if teachers are sick, how do we get substitutes in there? Especially because as a substitute, I'm going to be like, hey, that's the classroom where someone just had COVID. I'm probably going to think twice about substituting anyway. Lori, thank you so much for engaging with us. I can also say this is mentally stressing for educators as they're preparing lesson plans, both virtual and in class. There are some who are looking to possibly take the loss and pay to get out of their contract if forced to go back into the classroom. You know what, Lori? I was thinking that this week. I'm like, I talked to Edgar and I was like, if I, as a teacher, have some students that are at home virtually learning and some students that are here in the classroom, I don't necessarily have to make 2 lesson plans, but I do have to prepare instruction for 2 different lessons. Just because I'm teaching the same standard or the same objective, that does not look the same in person than virtually. And trust me, I know there are some bomb teachers who are about to figure this out. If we go half, like some in school and some virtual, and you have to do both of those jobs, there are some bomb teachers out there that are about to kill it. And they know what to do. But me, even at, if I was entering the school year as a 6th, 7th year teacher, I would be intimidated and be like, this means I have to find the resources and the format for online learning and in the classroom. Because that was one of the biggest struggles about virtual teaching, which was that we got sprung into okay, what is Google Forms? How to make Google Forms? Maybe not all of us, but some of us were like, okay, what's Padlet? How do you use it? Is it good for this lesson? What is Book Creator? Is it good for this lesson? How do you use YouTube as an instructional tool? And so all of those questions that we just don't necessarily ask ourselves regularly, in the classroom, which some of it we should, right, in order to differentiate our instruction. But virtual teaching versus in-person teaching, I just wonder, does that mean I have to do 2 jobs? So is anyone asking that question? I don't know. Also, and lastly, because we could go on and on, for real, but active shooter drills, fire drills, tornado drills, how are those done when we're socially distanced? Because the point of tornado drills is to get as packed closely together. You know what I'm saying? To get together so that we create barriers against the things that might be flying into the building. We go into smaller rooms. We go into rooms without windows. We go into rooms with the least amount of doors. In an active shooter drill, the point is to hide. The point is that's your first. They say hide, get out, take out. Those are the steps. So the first one is hide. In a classroom, if we're going to hide, we're probably going to be pretty close together in that one place in the classroom that is not easy to see. Some of the other questions our author asked. How will we conduct federally mandated fire drills? Will we have to sanitize our own classrooms? How are we getting sanitation supplies? Will those supplies be donated by parents like they've always been? Why do teachers and parents, why are we the ones responsible? I mean, that's a whole nother argument, right? But, or a whole nother discussion, but teachers and parents being the ones who are responsible for these supplies because we've been defunded. Will we be provided unlimited sick days, unlimited sick leave if we become ill or need to quarantine? How will co-teaching work? I was co-teaching it last year. How would that work if we should be limiting exposure to other adults in the building? If it's not safe to eat in a restaurant, how will it be safe for kids to eat in the cafeteria or even the classroom? Should we just go the whole day without eating, right? Like all these questions that teachers are asking themselves. Like I said, we could go on and on. We didn't even touch on the fact that school closures have a disproportionate impact on low income and students of color. So having them closed has a disproportionate impact, but having them open, or the term she used, the author used, is these rushed reopenings also will have a negative impact. COVID-19 in and of itself has had more of a negative impact on communities of color and low-income communities. A lot of it being due to the fact that we see that a lot of people of color are what's considered essential workers, not able to work from home. Elizabeth, thank you. And you can't wear a mask and eat. So do those morning hours of mask wearing go to waste at lunchtime? That's a good question. And that's a question I haven't even thought about, is that you can't eat with a mask. And it makes me think about how I want so bad to like visit with friends. I want so bad to like be out and about and doing stuff. And then I'm like, but then all those days that I've spent at home or that I spent with a mask on aren't going to be like worth it if then I go and waste it. Just like this, exactly what Elizabeth said, which is that, okay, I spent the whole morning with a mask on, but now we're eating lunch even in a classroom. And, you know, there's that risk now. So have all those hours with a mask on now kind of gone to waste. So many questions. It comes down to, obviously, like Martin said earlier, it's more realistic to go online. Like Ms. Herrera said earlier, too many health factors to consider. Like Connie said earlier, it's still too risky. These are educators on our comments who are, you know, on the forefront and who know what a day-to-day looks like in schools and know that it will be risky for us to go back. Like Edgar and I said yesterday, tell us what you need as a community. Please feel free to message us on our LEC page. Feel free to message me personally, Edgar personally. My email address, susana@latinxedco.org. Edgar is edgar@latinxedco.org. Because we want to know what can we do to help when decisions come out. What can we do to help you prepare? But before decisions come out, or if you disagree with your district's decision, what can we do to advocate for you and support you? As the Latinx Education Collaborative, our mission is to increase the number of Latinx representation in classrooms. That also means retaining those wonderful people who are already here. And so tell us how we can support you. Tell us how we can help you. when decisions come out, if some of that means virtual learning, feel free to reach out to me. I'm the Chief Community Officer, meaning that the community is my priority, meaning you. So let me know how I can help you, really with anything. Let's take the weekend and maybe take a breather, maybe relax at least for a little bit. I know some of you are like agents of change and out here doing the work, so I appreciate you and thank you so much for that. But remember to keep your health first, keep yourself healthy and your family healthy. Again, like I said, reach out to us with whatever you need. And I hope you have a great weekend. It's supposed to be really hot this weekend in Kansas City, so I'm about to be in the house. Have a good weekend, everybody, and we will see you on Monday for the coalition. Bye, everyone.